Welcome to our first webinar on public sector procurement from the Bid Toolkit. So in terms of introductions, I'm Jeremy Brim and I lead the Bid Toolkit. I bring 20 years of experience in working in bid teams and with business leaders in growing their businesses from large-scale PLCs, partnerships, and then working on the boards of SMEs. So during the course of 2018, we developed the Bid Toolkit, which we launched in partnership with YPO in late 2018. The Bid Toolkit is an online bid processing guide with training content and tools baked in pay-per-play. We have an enterprise agreement with our partners YPO. And there are a range of initiatives that we are working on together to engage with suppliers like you guys. So we have these webinars, we have breakfast events, training events. We'll keep you posted on new stuff as it comes. And then we also have some social responsibility partners. So we provide marketing support and funding for women in bids and proposals, and then wherever possible we use the facilities of Beyond Food, who are a charity and social enterprise that provide opportunities to get homeless people off the streets and into work. So public sector procurement, what's that all about? So first of all, the challenge, I guess, from your perspective, you guys need to sustainably and predictably grow your businesses, but many organisations really struggle to gain insight into their clients' drivers and prepare well for bids. They tend to have a fairly average win rate and they have an unpredictable short pipeline of opportunities. And many organisations find themselves on losing streaks with bids and opportunities, particularly on quality submission scores and some silly compliance issues. So over the course of a number of webinars, we're going to tackle these issues with you in the coming months. So first of all, the real Billy basics of why public procurement is required and why public buying organisations need to follow robust procurement processes. So we as the private sector sometimes struggle to understand where our public sector and regulated industry clients are coming from in terms of all of the hoops that they're asking us to jump through. It seems that it's a very high burden administrative and very compliance driven, whereas we'd just like to sell the client some stuff, some service, some product. But actually, if we take a step back and think of ourselves as taxpayers rather than suppliers for a moment, I'm sure we'd rather that our public bodies were buying in a robust, efficient way at the best possible value point, and I stress value rather than cost. So clearly, unfortunately, during the early part of 2019, we've seen the debacle with the Brexit ferries. It's a classic example of why public bodies should follow more robust procurement processes, because as you can see here, there's some mirth around what's unfolded in terms of ending up with a fairly weak supplier base for what is a critical supply piece for the country, what will be a fairly challenging time. So you know, it does show why a robust process is important, that we end up with public bodies that have robust supply chains of suppliers who have the right credibility and capability to deliver. So what's involved in public procurement, particularly for those of us who are new to this? So first of all, currently, certainly at the moment, we'll find out what happens post Brexit, although I believe the commitment from government is to maintain the same process as this, aligned with the current EU regulations. But the first step is that we would tend to see an ODU PIN notice, which is the Office of the Journal of the European Union, and PIN notice stands for Prior Information Notice. And that signals the intent to have some market engagement from the public sector body. So in effect, that's the first point where a public body or regulated industry organisation is coming out to market to engage with suppliers to understand how to shape their future tender so that they receive the maximum numbers of competitive tenders, that the process runs smoothly. So in effect, it's market testing, it's engagement to understand what you guys think before they build their documents and release the documents ready for the competition. And then once they've undertaken that market engagement, they will release a contract notice that will usually request an expression of interest. So there are, just for reference, many subscription services that you can subscribe to that will push both PIN notices and contract notices to you by email, or you can log into databases. But you can Google the TED site, where you can find those usually a day or so later than those subscription services. And those contract notices tell you in much more detail about the opportunities, so what the service or product is that the client's looking for, where that service or product is required in terms of geography, and value types and contract type in headline terms. It will usually give you a link to find some more information, and then express your interest, which triggers the next stage. So once you've expressed your interest, which is normally just clicking a button or a very short note to say that you would like to receive a pre-qualification questionnaire or standard questionnaire. In the private sector, this may be referred to as an RFI, where you're bidding to private sector organisations, which is a request for information. So in the old days, a pre-qualification questionnaire in effect is a backward-facing document. So this is about your history. It's about establishing your credibility to be able to undertake the service. So it's a standard questionnaire in the new model from the EU regs that were released a couple of years ago, which asks you to provide a series of data. So it asks you to provide things like your accounts, insurances, health and safety and quality processes and procedures and statements. Now, in the old days, that you had to supply all that material. With the new standard SQ, where the government has tried to standardise what the questions are to enable more efficiency and lower cost of sale, particularly for SMEs. There are processes where you don't actually have to provide the evidence until you've secured the contract later. You just need to state that you have it. They may also ask you for case studies at this point to demonstrate your credibility to provide the service. So basically evidence of where you've done something similar before to establish that credibility. They may also ask for CVs of key people. A bit of a watch out, a top tip: make sure that the case studies you provide during this pre-qualification period, you will be able to stand by when you get to the tender stage later, i.e. make sure you're using case studies that are real, that are relevant, and that could be substantiated independently by the client, and that you can write some really good stuff about when you get to the tender stage. And so after the client has received the number of pre-qualifications or questionnaires from the market, they will mark those. They genuinely will go and test the data within them. They will run credit scores on your organisation. So it is very important that you make sure that you understand where your business stands against the criteria that the client has set. But in effect, the client will then down select. They will remove the providers who have submitted questionnaires that are non-compliant or don't meet the criteria that they have requested, and they may choose to down select to just 3 or 4 providers to go to tender if you're tendering for a single source product or service contract. So this may be where they mark them to down select to a small number. Then those organisations that have been selected to tender will receive their tender submission. This is where by far the biggest amount of effort is placed in this process. So this is where you receive a document that's asking you to cast your mind forwards. So whereas the PQQ SQ is backward facing in terms of substantiating credibility, capacity, the tender is very much about specifically how are you going to deliver or provide the specific service or product that the client is requesting. So they will release to you a specification, and this is where you need to demonstrate that you can meet that specification, the people that you're going to apply to that, the enablers that you're going to apply to that service delivery. The client will then review and score those tender submissions. Those tender submissions may be split up into component parts. So the health and safety advisor, a client-side person, may well review the health and safety section. technical buyers will review different parts of your methods, statements, how you're responding to the specification, etc. But the client's likely, you can imagine, to sit in a room and read your documentation together and in effect score it against the scoring criteria. They may, at a point in time, ask you to come and present those proposals. So face-to-face or possibly a webinar meeting where you undertake a presentation. They may ask you to bring certain members of your team along, but that's in effect where you get the opportunity to really articulate your proposition that should shine through from your tender. It's not always the case that a presentation is called for. And then from that, the client will have scored both that tender and presentation performance that they received and make a decision as to who the winner is. There is a thing called a cooling off period in public sector bidding, usually around a couple of weeks, where the announcement isn't made publicly as to who's won the contract, but the people who have lost have been notified, and the organisation that's won has received its preferred bidder letter, and then at the end of that, a contract is awarded and you move into mobilisation. So that's the cradle to grave, what's involved in public sector procurement. In terms of your team and who helps your business respond to that need or that tender process, it's worth thinking through. We set out in the bid process, in the bid toolkit bid process here, a number of roles and responsibilities, or hero roles. Do take the time to go to the website and read the detail behind each of these roles. But we believe it's quite important when you're responding to a tender that you have clear roles and responsibilities, so nothing is missed, and importantly also there's no overlap. Everybody knows their role on the bid and what they're there to do. So compliance, we've found through our research working with our YPO friends that more than 20% of certainly PPQ submissions, but also through to tender, fail on compliance issues. Fairly silly, obvious, common sense stuff, but you'd be amazed the amount of times that bid submissions end up in the bin. And bear in mind that any bid that you submit is an investment decision from your business. It costs real money and time. These are fairly significant exercises. You can read in some of our blog posts about how to make good bid decisions as an investment decision, but throwing away a few weeks worth of work from a few people in your organisation on some compliance issues is a huge waste. So here's some top tips here around compliance. So make sure that you highlight any key rules and write them into a compliance matrix that everybody who's working on your bid is made aware of. Put that compliance matrix on the wall of your war room if you've got a meeting room where you're running the bid from, so it's nice and visible, everybody can see it. Make a special note of delivery instructions. You know, my YPO friends tell me about the sheer number of times where suppliers who are bidding for product contracts to supply pens and pencils or whatever it may be fail to get their samples of their products here on time. So they are therefore non-compliant and their bid goes in the bin. So make sure you're very aware of delivery instructions, where your samples or tender documents need to be uploaded to or delivered to by which time, and make sure you get it there nice and early. When you're storyboarding responses, quality submission responses that you're writing, make sure you write key rules into any storyboards that note it on flip charts. Some of those rules, so that may include things like font sizes, word counts, page lengths. Please make sure you stick to the rules, because anything that goes beyond the page length, for instance, just will not be read, and you may well therefore not be responding fully to the question that the client's asked you, and you may well score lower than your competitors as a result, or you risk being non-compliant and being ruled out of the process altogether. So really make sure you ensure that you structure responses in accordance with the client's instructions and guidance that they've given you. Do believe me that these guys are very good at writing all of the things that you need to know into their ITT. They do receive, from our research, a great amount of clarifications from suppliers on points of detail which are actually already in the tender documents if they were read properly. So do take the time to read the client's documentation cover to cover, because you're making yourself look silly asking questions about things like font size when it's clearly in the documentation. So I hope that gives you a good overview of public sector procurement. We've got some other stuff going on with YPO in partnership. So we offer a full-day bidding masterclass training program where you come and spend a day with me, a Malmaison hotel across the country. I'm also joined by a procurement professional, a category manager from YPO. So it's what we call having the conversation. You get the private sector bidding perspective, and also we can ask the procurement people interesting questions that spark some interesting debate. We are also developing half-day specific courses for categories at the moment, which will launch from June onwards in 2019. And we also do provide bespoke workplace courses where I will come to your workplace and deliver a course. Having received some ITTs and copies of your bids, I'll bespoke the course to you guys. There are a number of these webinars that will take place throughout the year. And then we also have breakfast events that we've called Bids and Procurement Live, which are a 2-hour mini conference with 3 panels of experts on delivering panel discussion on themes of the day. Do visit the website for more information on events. So I hope you've enjoyed that webinar. You can find my contact details here and do find me on LinkedIn.